In 1946, in the quiet aftermath of the most destructive war in human history, British military historian B.H. Liddell Hart began interviewing captured German generals. These were men who had commanded armies, planned campaigns, and witnessed the collapse of the Third Reich from the inside. During one of these interviews, Liddell Hart posed what he believed was a straightforward military question. What would have defeated Germany faster? He expected technical explanations, logistics failures, Allied air supremacy, shortages of fuel, or the overwhelming industrial output of the United States. Instead, the answers he received shocked him. The German commanders did not blame tanks or planes. They blamed a decision. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the senior German commander in the West, leaned forward and spoke with clarity. What the Allies had done in September 1944, he said, was not merely a missed opportunity. It was a strategic gift, a gift handed to Germany at the very moment it stood defenseless. According to Rundstedt, that single decision extended the war by at least 6 months and cost tens of thousands of Allied lives, most of them American. Liddell Hart later wrote that he realized something deeply unsettling. He was no longer listening to an academic critique of operations or maps. He was listening to an explanation of why the guns did not fall silent half a year earlier. Every grave dug between September 1944 and May 1945 suddenly felt connected to that choice. By the end of August 1944, Germany was already beaten. The German army in France was not retreating, it was disintegrating. The catastrophe at the Falaise Pocket had destroyed entire formations. Tens of thousands of soldiers were captured. Tens of thousands more were killed. Equipment losses were total. Tanks, artillery pieces, trucks, and supply vehicles littered the roads for miles, abandoned by fleeing units. When Field Marshal Walter Model arrived to assume command of the Western Front, he was appalled by what he found. Hitler had sent him as a crisis manager, the man expected to salvage impossible situations. But there was little left to salvage. Model found shattered remnants of divisions. Officers without soldiers. Soldiers without weapons. Defensive positions that existed only on planning maps. The reality was brutal. Germany had no coherent defense in the West. Model could muster barely 100 operational tanks. Most of the rest were broken down or immobilized by lack of fuel. Against him stood 12 fully supplied Allied armored divisions, advancing rapidly. Germany's industrial heart, the Ruhr region, the forge that produced its weapons, lay virtually undefended. Model later admitted he had nothing capable of stopping a determined, concentrated Allied assault. For nearly 3 weeks in September 1944, Germany was exposed. Allied intelligence knew it. Patton's Third Army knew it. The soldiers racing across France could feel it. German resistance was collapsing faster than the Allies could exploit it. Units were advancing at such speed that supply columns struggled to keep up. For the first time since D-Day, victory felt close. Some American soldiers believed the war would be over by Thanksgiving. What they did not realize was that the momentum was already being slowed by decisions made far behind the front lines. General George S. Patton reached the Moselle River, the last major natural barrier before the Siegfried Line. His tanks stood barely 100 miles from Germany itself. Beyond that lay the Rhine River. Beyond the Rhine lay the heart of the Reich. Patton's intelligence staff delivered the same assessment repeatedly. The German army was broken. One concentrated blow would finish it. Meanwhile, Model scrambled desperately. He pulled elderly reservists out of training depots. He pressed teenage boys from the Hitler Youth into uniform. Clerks, factory workers, anyone who could hold a rifle was sent to the front. He was constructing a defense out of desperation and hope. Every day the Allies delayed made Model stronger. Every week allowed Germany to recover. On September 1, 1944, Dwight D. Eisenhower assumed direct command of Allied ground forces. He now faced the most important decision of the campaign. There were 2 options. The first was concentration: select a single axis of advance, give it overwhelming force, and drive straight into Germany. It was dangerous but decisive. If it succeeded, the war could end in weeks. The second was the broad front strategy: advance everywhere at once, applying pressure across the entire front. Patton wanted concentration. American doctrine supported it. German defenses could not stop it. But Eisenhower was not only a battlefield commander. He was the manager of a fragile political coalition. Bernard Montgomery demanded priority in the North. Winston Churchill pressed President Roosevelt to ensure Britain played a central role in victory. Montgomery threatened to bypass Eisenhower entirely and appealed directly to Churchill if his demands were ignored. Patton, meanwhile, was politically toxic. His earlier slapping incidents made him impossible to promote publicly. Giving him supreme operational control would have sparked outrage in Washington. Logistics further complicated matters. The Allies captured Antwerp on September 4, one of Europe's largest ports. But German forces still controlled the Scheldt estuary, rendering the port useless. Clearing it was Montgomery's responsibility, but his focus lay elsewhere. Eisenhower chose the broad front. Not because he misunderstood the battlefield, but because he understood the politics. The cost was immediate. Patton's Third Army stalled, not due to German resistance, but because fuel ran out. The Allied supply system, still tied to Normandy beaches, was stretched to the breaking point. The Red Ball Express could not move fuel fast enough. When Eisenhower had to choose who received priority supplies, he chose Montgomery. Those supplies went to Operation Market Garden, a massive airborne assault designed to seize bridges across the Rhine in the Netherlands. Montgomery promised it would end the war by Christmas. Eisenhower committed fully. Fuel, aircraft, ammunition, and airborne divisions were diverted. American paratroopers were placed under British command. Allied air power focused almost entirely on the operation. Patton watched helplessly as his tanks sat idle, while Germany regained strength. Market Garden began on September 17, 1944. It became the largest airborne operation in history, and one of the greatest failures. At Arnhem, British paratroopers were surrounded by German armored units they were never supposed to encounter. Of the 10,000 men who landed, fewer than 2,000 escaped. Allied casualties exceeded 17,000. The tragedy was not only the men lost. It was the momentum that vanished. Walter Model could scarcely believe his luck. Weeks earlier, he had nothing. Now, the Allied advance had slowed. He reorganized shattered units, activated reserves, and rebuilt the West Wall, known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line. By October, Germany had a defensive line. By November, it had reserves. By December, Model was planning a counteroffensive. The Allies had given him 6 weeks that should never have existed. The war dragged through winter. Germany surrendered in May 1945. After the war, the interrogations began. When Liddell Hart compared testimonies from German generals, the conclusion was devastating. Every senior commander agreed. The Allies had missed a decisive opportunity in autumn 1944. They explained how Germany could have been destroyed, and who could have done it. Not Montgomery. He was predictable. Not Bradley. He was cautious. But Patton terrified them. Speed. Aggression. Relentless pressure. That was the American style of war they feared most. Coalition politics suppressed it. Once September passed, the Allies paid in blood. The Hurtgen Forest, the Siegfried Line, the frozen trenches of winter, all battles that German generals said were unnecessary. Then came December 16, 1944. Germany launched its final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. It succeeded initially because Allied forces were spread thin. 80,000 American casualties followed. 19,000 dead. German generals admitted it was only possible because they had been given time. Eisenhower kept the alliance together. That was his achievement. But unity came at a price. History remembers Eisenhower as the man who won the war. German generals remembered him as the man who allowed them to survive the autumn of 1944. There is a difference between winning a war and ending it as fast as possible. The dates on the headstones tell that story. And history is left with one final question. If the enemy told